This handheld has not one, but 2 screens. It runs Android and somehow plays a lot of your Steam games. This is the AYN Thor. At first glance, it kind of looks like a Nintendo DS, but the more time you spend with it, the more unusual it starts to feel. It's not quite a phone, it's not a traditional handheld, and it's definitely not something you see companies try very often. And after living with it for the last 3 months, I've realized the Thor might be one of the strangest handhelds I've ever owned. So in this video, I want to talk about what actually makes the Thor so different, what it's been like owning one, and maybe the biggest question of all, who is this thing actually for? So let's start out with the most obvious question first. What actually makes the Thor different from other handhelds? The first time I saw the Thor myself, my immediate reaction was kind of just like, oh, this looks like a modern 3DS. It's pretty cool. It's a clamshell handheld with 2 screens, and that instantly triggers nostalgia for just about anybody who had owned a Nintendo DS back in the day. But that impression changes pretty quickly, because then you start seeing it run things like Switch emulation, Steam games, and a bunch of other platforms. And suddenly you realize that this thing is operating in a completely different space. The Thor isn't an x86 PC handheld though, something like the Steam Deck. It's actually really different. Instead it runs Android, like a cell phone, which actually opens the door to a completely different ecosystem of apps and different ways to use the device. And that combination of a clamshell design, Android flexibility, and strong emulation performance is really what makes the Thor stand out from other handhelds. But the biggest difference here is obviously that second screen. Nintendo built an entire generation of handhelds around that idea, but those systems were designed specifically around gameplay, whereas the Thor approaches it completely differently. Because it runs Android, the second screen isn't tied to a game specifically anymore. You can run apps, pull up guides, monitor performance, or you can just leave it off entirely. And honestly, that's how I use it a lot of the time myself personally. Sometimes I'll use it for something like listening to an audiobook or Spotify, but other times I'll just focus on the game on the top display. And that flexibility is what makes the device feel so different. That second screen isn't something you have to use. It's something that's there when you want to use it. So the Thor ends up sitting in this interesting middle space. It's not powerful enough to compete with something like a Steam Deck, but it also does things most Android handhelds can't. If I had to describe it simply, it's a dual screen Android handheld built around portability and emulation. But of course, the real question isn't what it looks like on paper. The real question is, what is it actually like to live with this thing? And because I've been using the Thor for the past 3 months consistently, I can give you some pretty honest feedback here. When I first got it, the thing I was most excited about was definitely Switch and 3DS emulation. I was also curious about how Steam games would run on it. And on the emulation side, it really didn't disappoint. Switch, 3DS, GameCube, Wii U, everything ran really well after a little bit of tweaking and maybe watching a tutorial here and there. But what definitely surprised me most was Steam through GameHub. At one point, I ended up playing through most of Resident Evil 4, the 2007 PC version on this thing, which is something I definitely didn't expect to be doing on such a small Android clamshell handheld. But what really changed my perspective was how it fit into my everyday life. Over the last few months, I found myself reaching for the Thor almost every time I left the house. Like I said, it's not the most powerful handheld I own, But for emulation, for indie games and, just lighter, older PC titles, it's honestly perfect for those short gaming sessions while you're out and about. I love pulling this thing out when I'm waiting in a line, when I'm running errands, when I'm doing laundry. Because of that goated clamshell design, it's so easy just to throw into a small bag like I show here, or to fit into your back pocket, depending if you wear loose enough pants. And what's interesting about that is that it actually affected the way I use my other handhelds. For instance, my Steam Deck basically became my at-home PC handheld, while the Thor became my little go-to travel buddy. After a few months of using it, it honestly became like a daily device for me. Even after testing more powerful Android handhelds, like the AYN 3 that was released pretty recently, this is the one I ended up keeping out of the two. And the biggest reason was the design itself. It's simply the most portable gaming device I own, while still being powerful enough to play most of the games I want to play while I'm on the go. Hey, quick side note here, if you're enjoying the video so far, it would really help me out if you gave it a thumbs up. And let me know in the comments if there's anything I could do to take these videos to the next level. And hey, thanks for being here. Now, of course, I've been saying some pretty nice things about the Thor, but of course it isn't perfect. Let's go over a couple reasons why. Setup takes some time. You do have to configure things yourself. It's not ready to play with out of the box. The ergonomics can also be tricky for bigger hands. There are grips available, but once you add one, you lose some of the portability. The stock Android launcher also leaves a lot to be desired. And every once in a blue moon, I noticed the device doesn't go to sleep after I close the lid, which can lead to the dreaded hot bag situation where, you're storing it somewhere and it's still running and it's just getting hot and the fan is running. It's all bad. But there are also a lot of things the Thor does really well. For instance, the battery life has been great on this thing. On top of that, the customization options are insane, especially with the TPU covers that AYN sells. Things like skins, stickers, and the lanyard anchors, they make it really easy to make the device feel uniquely yours. And that's something we don't often see anymore in the handheld gaming sphere. I also really appreciate the charging separation, which lets you run the device directly from a power bank without stressing the internal battery. But the biggest thing the Thor has done for me is something a little more personal. It's made me fall back in love with a lot of games I grew up playing. Now I can take those classic games with me anywhere and even upscale them if I want to for a more modern experience. Which brings us to our final and most important question of all. Who is this device actually for? Because although I personally love the Thor, it's definitely not gonna appeal to everyone. If somebody came up to me on the street and said, "Hey Tom, should I get the AYN Thor?" I'd have a lot of questions for them, but in general, most of the time I'd probably still recommend the Steam Deck. And I think that's the opinion of a lot of people who have owned the AYN Thor. And the reason is because the Steam Deck is more powerful and it's just easier to set up and easier to live with for most people. But there are 3 situations where I would recommend the Thor, where it would really make sense. And the first one is if you want the most accurate DS or 3DS emulation experience. Second, if portability matters more to you than raw power. And third, if most of the games you play are older titles, emulation, or indie games. If you fall into one of these categories, the Thor becomes a really compelling device that you should consider. If you're expecting the most powerful handheld or something that works perfectly out of the box, definitely turn around and walk away. This is 100% a device that requires some patience, tweaking, and the right expectations. So before I get to my final point here, before we wrap things up, if you enjoyed this video, it would genuinely mean a lot to me if you liked the video and subscribed to the channel. I've been having so much fun making these handheld videos and indie gaming videos. And if you're curious about the Steam Deck specifically, I actually made a full video about that as well, where I talk about why it's one of my favorite gaming handhelds. To close out my thoughts on the AYN Thor, you know, it really has me looking forward to the future of AYN and Android handheld gaming in general. I can't help but feel as though the Thor is the start to something special. I think we're gonna see a really big boom in the Android gaming handheld scene really soon. And it feels like this device is kind of on the cutting edge of experimentation on that front, which is really exciting. So again, I'm looking forward to the future. But for now, in the present, I'm just enjoying my Thor on the daily. And honestly, every time I open this thing up, I can't help but smile, because I know I'm about to have a great experience.